Today we have Derek Humphry, founder of the Hemlock Society, author of the book Final Exit, Dr. Richard MacDonald, who was medical director of the Hemlock Society and has worked with Final Exit Network, and me, who was also head of the Hemlock Society. But another thing that we have in common is that once we were all president of the World Federation of Right to Die Societies, which incorporates most of the Right to Die societies around the world. Not that there are that many, there are about 40, I think, in some 28 countries. Some Right to Die societies don't belong, but it enables us to keep up with each other and to know what's going on in the rest of the world, which in many cases is more advanced than what's going on in the United States. And there are continuing efforts to change the law in many countries. So I thought today we would talk about these efforts as we know them now in March 2015, because the picture is constantly changing, and not only where they're happening, but what kind of laws are going on now in some countries which are beyond what we permit in the United States, even where the law has changed. Derek keeps us informed through his Ergo listserv, and we all attended the last World Conference put on in Chicago by the World Federation of Right to Die Societies and the Final Exit Network. So we have some idea of what's going on. So let's first review the countries where things are about to change. Dick, you had talked about this before, but maybe you can review what's going on now in Canada just briefly.
Oh, in Canada, last year in April, the first province to pass a dying with dignity law was Quebec, and they have that will start to activate. In other words, patients can ask their physician for assistance in dying, starting the 1st of 2016. So that province has been the leader in support of dying with dignity movement, all of Canada. Their population, which, as most people know, has a provincial, shall we say, religion of Catholicism. So it's been quite surprising that 80 to 90% of the residents of Quebec are the ones who are in favor of having assisted dying, much more than any other province.
It's amazing, isn't it?
The other provinces, especially western provinces, such as Alberta, which was my home initially, they are running only just over 50% in the general population. So it's been remarkable that in a Catholic province it has passed, in spite, of course, of resistance from the leaders of the church. And it was passed in a way that was very well done to make it part of health law, not criminal law. And by removing the subject of assisted dying from the law basis, it's made it into health law, and it becomes part of the continuum of care from all through life. The continuum of care is through your physicians and hospitals and so on, but it is now included that you may ask for an assisted death, and it also includes for patients who are unable to help themselves die by swallowing medication. It includes the fact that a physician may provide them with a peaceful death by injectable medication.
Prohibiting assisted dying?
That's correct, and that's a change from 7 or 8 years ago when the Supreme Court ruled on a marginal number. I think it was 4-3 at that time, that said it was still against the law to have someone have an assisted death, but they reversed that this year and have said it's a constitutional right of every Canadian, if they choose to have assistance in dying, to have that provided to them by their physician.
So that goes into effect a year from now, a year from the decision.
Well, what they did, the Supreme Court said it's now up to Parliament to accept the idea that they must come up with the rules and regulations. And so whether they will do this as a national law or, as I suspect they will do, they will make it province by province, because the health programs are handled province by province. Even though it's a national health care, Medicare type system, each province controls and regulates their health care. So making it a health law instead of a criminal law is a huge advance.
So if I'm not mistaken, unlike this country, they have already decriminalized medical marijuana, and same-sex marriage is legal all over Canada.
Yes, it's quite remarkable, but in spite even of sometimes very conservative national parliament leadership, they have had these social advances much ahead of the U.S.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Interesting that I'm sitting between two foreign-born people here, but Derek Humphry is from England, and there's a lot going on now in the Parliament in England. Can you summarize that for us, Derek?
Yes, the English have been trying to change the law on assisted dying since 1936. There have been some 9 or 10 bills have come in front of Parliament over the years and always been rejected. But the new bill that's being offered by the head count of Parliament is much more likely to pass.
That's in the House of Lords now, isn't it?
It's been in a law which would allow assisted dying, medical assisted dying, is now in front of Parliament, is being torn to pieces in committees, the usual way. But hopefully it will emerge intact, and probably later this year it'll be voted on. Because laws in England, assisted suicide is punishable by up to 15 years imprisonment. And they rarely send people to prison for it, but they do bring them into court quite a lot, and people suffer the distress of court appearances for this non-crime. So we're hopeful that there will at last, after 70 years of trying, get the law passed in England. The climate is in favour.
3 years ago, that Lord Jaffe introduced a bill in the House of Lords too.
Yes.
And we had a lot of hope for that passing, and I guess it was the Archbishop of Canterbury that argued against it so persuasively that they voted against it.
Yes. There's 8 times that they've lost in the Parliament, but they sense now that the climate worldwide has changed, and according to people who've done a head count, this is likely to pass this time, at long last.
They have a very strong right to die organization in England, Dignity in Dying, that have put a lot of money and effort into this.
Oh yes, that's been their goal, again, since 1936.
When it was the Voluntary Euthanasia.
Yes, it had a different name, but it's the same organization. And they've been struggling for this for years.
With 80% of the public seem to be in favor, but that seems to be disregarded by the lawmakers, which is not unusual.
Yes. Well, the church has enormous power in Parliament. They usually don't exercise their power, except when you come to an ethical issue like assisted suicide, then or mixed marriage. Then suddenly the House of Lords is full of the bishops who've never been around for months or years. And
They're not Catholic, they're Anglican.
No, they're Protestant, yes. Yeah. But they all turn out to argue about it and tear it to pieces and vote against it. But even they are modifying their views, because in young people nowadays, the millenniums as they're called, they're what I call cafeteria Christians. Young people nowadays take, a great many, they take out of the church what they want: baptism, wedding. But as for going to Mass and communion and every Sunday morning, not very likely to go.
No, church attendance in England is down to practically zero.
Same with abortion and assisted dying. You know, if it suits them to have it, then they will use it. So it's a pick and choose of people nowadays, and therefore the climate is blowing in our favor.
If I recall, surveys have shown that the biggest predictor of opposition to the right to die is frequency of church attendance. That is, you can practically predict a person's attitude if you ask them how often they attend church. And of course, I think Oregon has the lowest frequency of church attendance, which is not surprising that it passed the first law. And I think Washington is close behind.
Yes. Oh, yes, it's a well-known fact that Oregon people are the smallest churchgoers. They go fishing instead, and that's a well-known record.
Let's talk about Down Under. There's a lot of activity, and there has been a lot of activity in Australia and New Zealand. And in fact, in Australia, the Northern Territory was the first jurisdiction in the world to have a law permitting voluntary euthanasia and physician-assisted dying.
Right, in 1996.
That's right. And that's when I came on board at Hemlock, and you and I went to the conference in Melbourne. And Bob Dent was the first person in the world to die under a law, a Buddhist man with prostate cancer. And the doctor that helped him was Philip Nitschke, who is still campaigning for people to have a peaceful death in Australia. That law then was rescinded after Philip helped 4 people die. The law was rescinded by the federal parliament in Canberra, which they could do because the Northern Territory was not a state, it was only a territory. And since then, the bill has been introduced, I think, in practically every state in Australia. Is that right, Derek? You know, anybody keep track of all this?
I don't know if it's in every state, but certainly South Australia.
I think Queensland is the only one that has not had a bill.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've all tried, but none of the states have passed.
No.
No. They've all been attempting since about 1972
Right.
it started. But like in England, they keep on putting forward intelligent legislation in the different states and not succeeding. But they will succeed, and they're getting closer.
And again, it's 80% or more of the population wants such a law, and the lawmakers resist. There's a very interesting organization in Australia called Christians Supporting Voluntary Euthanasia.
Mm-hmm.
And they've made a very good point that it's all a very Christian thing to do, is to be able to provide people a peaceful death. And Tasmania had a proposal, of course. Now in New Zealand, the second year, they're proposing a very good law there. They've made a tremendous effort, but again, no success. There have been 2 prosecutions of people there who wrote books about helping their loved ones die, their mothers die, actually, both of them. Leslie Martin wrote a book about helping her mother die, and Sean Davison wrote a book about helping his mother die. And they both wrote books about the sequelae of that, which they both were prosecuted and given sentences. Sean given house arrest, and Leslie actually had to serve time in prison.
Right.
But hopefully New Zealand too will change. So we're looking forward to that. So these are 4 English, well, we haven't talked about the United States, but Canada, New Zealand, England, 3 English-speaking countries. And we'll summarize what's going on in the United States in a minute, but let's talk about Europe. We know that the first national legislation was passed in the Netherlands. What was that, 2003?
2002.
Yeah. And
But they've been experimenting
That's
with
right.
developing that law for 15 years or more before that, wasn't it?
Yes.
Where it was permitted as long as they followed the guidelines.
right.
Physicians could assist a patient.
Slight correction, because it's so far, the Swiss passed an assisted suicide law which came into effect in 1942.
Ah,
It was passed in 40, came into effect in 42. And the Swiss allow non-doctor assisted suicide. And as long as the assistance in dying is for a noble purpose, with no money involved, no
Right.
evil
Okay.
intent,
right.
and it's reported to the police. It mustn't be done secretly. And the case is reported to the police. Then there are no prosecutions in Switzerland.
No voluntary euthanasia, just assisted dying.
Yes. The oral drinking
Right.
of a glass of Nembutal.
Self-administered.
But injection, death by injection, is against the law in Switzerland. Yeah.
And so Switzerland has 5 organizations that provide help to people, 3 of which provide help to foreigners.
Yes. Yes.
And the Swiss have voted on that, and they voted to keep that provision in their law.
Yes. It's been reinforced several times. Yeah.
So the most notable one is Dignitas. It's been around, I don't know how many years, 10 years, 12 years. And Life Circle is another one, and then there's a third one, a smaller one, which I don't remember the name of.
Well, there's the other 2 groups serve local populations
Well,
only.
the 2
Fr-
exit organizations serve local.
Exit France, exit French speaking, and exit German speaking.
Right.
They only cater to their own members,
Right.
whereas the other 2 organizations will allow foreigners to be considered.
Well, there's three organizations that serve foreign. The third one is a small one. I actually can't remember the name of it, but
Yes.
it is amazing for a small country like that. And I gather the 2 exit organizations that serve their local people have increasing membership all the time.
Mm.
So Switzerland is very fortunate, I think, to have such
Yes.
widespread availability.
And the other countries whose citizens can go to Switzerland
Yes.
and have a peaceful dying process
Yes.
with one of the Swiss groups, that number keeps increasing.
That's right.
Germany has the most number of people
Yeah.
go to Switzerland for a peaceful death.
And then England.
And then England's
And then
had
England, yeah.
more and more.
And they were
over the
starting to
last-
prosecute the people who brought the patients over to England, and they sort of given that one up, I think.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mm. But there's without doubt the front runners in voluntary euthanasia, assisted suicide, are the Dutch. They've gone into it more carefully and made more advances. And for about 10 years before the actual law was passed in 2002, the Supreme Court, the Dutch Supreme Court, made a decision. Doctors can help people to die in the right circumstances, where it's justified, and they will not be prosecuted. So the Dutch were able to set up organizations and methods, and doctors were able to learn the do's and don'ts and who will and who won't of this. And then in 2002, they passed a firm law which brought the practice into law. But they've been the front runners.
Yeah, and I think an interesting point about the Dutch is it was the physicians who initiated the idea of having assisted dying for their patients.
Yes.
And that to me is what is negated in other countries,
Yes.
where physician leadership
Yes.
of their organizations opposed
Yes.
the idea of physician-assisted dying.
Yes.
But the
Royal Dutch Medical
Royal
Society.
Dutch Medical Association
Yeah.
was the initiator.
Made a huge difference. Yeah.
It does.
Also, the criteria for help in dying in those countries is quite different than we have in Oregon, Washington, and Vermont. And that is essentially unbearable suffering as defined by the patient,
Right.
where we require terminal illness, 6 months to live, which has nothing really to do with the patient's suffering. It only has some measurement of time that the patient, by some doctor's agreement, 2 doctors have to agree, can guess that a patient will die within 6 months. So it's
And that's something that we physicians cannot do. I mean,
predict.
there's no way. It's absolutely impractical, and it should not be part of the law
Right.
in any country. And I think it's only in the States that the insistence has always been on the 6 months to die. And that was largely came about because of Medicare rules
For hospice.
for hospice
Yeah,
care.
right.
So,
And it's also easier to make an argument that the person is going to die anyway, just making a choice in how they die. So I understand that argument, but it really excludes too many people. Even when the Washington law passed in 2012, the main proponent was Booth Gardner, the former governor of Washington, who couldn't use the law because he had Parkinson's disease. There was no way to say he was going to die in 6 months. So it's not a good criteria. I think we all agree. And in the states where there's no statute, like Montana, where there's only a court, not only a court decision, but the Supreme Court of Montana, we'll go into this in a minute, but said it's constitutional there. And in New Mexico now, which is we're still awaiting the court's opinion. And in Hawaii, I think too, there's no statute. So the criteria for helping people die may not be a terminal illness at all. In fact, there may not be any written criteria. So let's talk. So after Holland passed their law, then Belgium followed, and then Luxembourg.
well,
That was
Belgium's
interesting.
law actually passed before the Netherlands
Did it?
passed their law. Passed a few months the same year,
Mm.
but it was actually passed by their parliament
Mm.
before the Dutch law was passed,
Mm.
which was unusual because they hadn't been experimenting as long as the
Right.
government.
They've had some very interesting cases there recently.
Very, yes. They have included children with terminal illness
Yeah, for one.
that were suffering unbearably.
That's gotten a lot of criticism from our country,
Yes.
but it was passed so overwhelmingly by the Belgian Parliament with the support of the Pediatric Society, if I remember.
Yeah.
Because especially we here, when we speak of children, we think of 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds. But in fact, a child can be 17 years old.
Correct.
And if that's
In
a
most
young
countries,
man or
that's
woman,
right.
I don't know what. So it should be children and young people should be the phrase. The children is off-putting. Yes, you do worry about little children
But I
being
think it's
helped
true,
to
and
die.
Holland has been for a long time, that if a baby is born seriously defective, in our country, the baby is put aside and not
Yes.
fed and eventually dies. But in the Netherlands, they can actually administer euthanasia with the agreement of the parents.
Yeah,
Isn't that right?
yeah.
And also, a lot of times a child undergoes so much horrible treatment, chemotherapy or whatever, the child says, I'm ready to give up, and the parents are not. So this allows the child at least to have some say in whether they want to continue or not. But so in Belgium, of course, we have one champion that's spoken quite a bit about things, Jan Bernheim, who says that palliative care in Belgium merges right into euthanasia, so that people getting palliative care, unlike here, can then ask for euthanasia and get it under the same roof, essentially,
Yeah.
Again, the continuum of care.
Right.
Yeah.
as it will be in Quebec.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
But a couple of other interesting categories that are going on in Europe are people who are tired of living. And has been a campaign in the Netherlands now
Yes.
for a long time.
Yes, they're moving forward in the Netherlands on both helping mentally ill people to die and very old people who wish to die. They're going slowly, but it's beginning to appear on the radar. The mentally ill people have to show a long record of treatment and failure of treatment and long years of suffering. They don't accept somebody who just come along and say, I'm depressed or anything like that. They're very careful in their protocols as to how. And they're also beginning to help people who can show that their extreme old age is a suffering in itself. So they're beginning to break through on new barriers in the Netherlands.
Well, that was the
and
other
we're all
category.
watching.
Right.
It's interesting that in the places in the world where there is physician-assisted dying, it's either there's a law or people do it themselves. But we don't know much about that. We know that the book Final Exit is selling around the world and has been translated into 13 languages. But in America, we decided when we were with the Hemlock Society that there probably is a middle way. A way that if a person is going to do it themselves, they should at least have guidance from somebody with expertise, and they should not have to die alone, that somebody should be there with them. And so on that basis, we started the Caring Friends program in Hemlock, which then morphed into the Final Exit Network, which happened after the merger of the Hemlock Society, which then there is no National Hemlock Society. So the national organization is now the Final Exit Network, and it's a compromise between do-it-yourself and legal physician aid in dying. That is, it does not require a physician, and it is not covered by a law because it is not assisted dying or assisted suicide. That is, in that program, we provide information and support. We go to people's homes. We're at the bedside if they do choose to hasten their death. The people whom we work with are carefully screened by our medical evaluation committee, but no assistance is provided. That is, no means are provided for these people. They have to provide their own means, and no physical assistance. So they have to self-administer the means to die. And that's a very interesting compromise. It has been very successful since the Caring Friends program started in 1998 and continues to this day in the Final Exit Network in 2015. Of course, the Final Exit Network has had 3 lawsuits challenging the proposition that this is not assistance. But so far, we've been able to function, and we've been able to provide a peaceful death to many people who've been very grateful for the services of the Final Exit Network. It's interesting that no other country has adopted such a model, even though there was some attempt in Australia to do it with a program that they tried, and they trained people, but they were apparently intimidated by the fact that there is no First Amendment protection in Australia. So that does sort of complete our survey around the world, but it remains interesting that the Final Exit Network model is unique to the United States.
You know, studies have shown that even in Oregon, more people die by refusal of food and fluids than by using the Oregon Death with Dignity law. And certainly that happens here in this retirement place that I live in.
Yeah,
And it's accepted here. And it's not accepted to hang yourself or shoot yourself. People do that quietly.
Unfortunately.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it is accepted to have hospice come and then stop eating and drinking.
Well,
And
that's accepted by leaders of the opposition to the laws.
that's right.
It's accepted by church leaders. It's accepted.
It's not
by,
accepted by Catholic hospitals. You can't do it in a Catholic hospital.
Well, actually, there are some that you can. Depends on who's running the hospice, but that's the commonest
Hospitals.
form in hospice care.
Yeah,
Refusing nutrition and fluids
fluids is the big
is the
thing.
important thing. But dehydrating death is the commonest way people die in hospice care
That's
in
right.
America.
And we've had 2 cases here in this retirement community where 2 men actually died in 5 and 7 days. One in 5 days, he had morphine every 2 hours and then every hour, so it only took 5 days.
Well, that's assistance in dying.
Oh, well,
Forget
hospice
that.
wouldn't say that.
And much of that happens, although it's not accepted to say that, but much of the hospice care with medication is appropriate, certainly, to ease their any discomforts and so on. But giving morphine every 2 hours is definitely assistance in dying. And that's also known in the medical world as double effect. And that, to me, the double effect rule, where a doctor who is in charge of ordering that medication says that they know that this will end the life of that patient, but they don't intend that as the primary reason for
Just to
giving
ease
it.
suffering.
It's to relieve suffering.
Right.
And that's what I call the hypocritic law. So, and it's not right that physicians should have to work around that subject.
I don't mind that so much as I do mind that when I debate a hospice doctor, they said, no, doctors should never end their patients' lives. Oh, never. And I'm definitely against any legislation. But when I see a patient that's suffering terribly, then doctor, make a decision to end that patient's life. So that part bothers me, that the patient doesn't have control over
It should be. It should be a contract between physician and patient, but the patient's wishes should be the controlling item, and physicians should be thinking about what is in the best interest of that patient.
I just want to say that without intervention by hospice or some other medical thing going on, it could take 14 days from the time the last
Absolutely.
fluid is taken. So that's really a difficult way to go. Dr. Chabot has done a book, I guess, on refusal of food and hydration.
Right.
That's very good, and people should be totally prepared to do this in the best way possible. It's not just, and I've seen members of Hemlock even say this, oh, well, I'll just go and close my door and stop eating and drinking.
Yeah.
It is not simple. It is not easy. You must have some kind
You
of
must
medical
have
or nursing
support
care.
with medication.
Yeah, and you need a caregiver as well.
And caregiver to keep the lips and
And you
mouth
need a caregiver
moist.
who's sympathetic, because
Absolutely.
if it's your dear sister who doesn't want to see you die, and instead she sees you withering away and not eating and drinking, she will eventually return you to the hospital to be rehydrated, and that's the end of it. So
Yeah, with appropriate care, refusing fluids is not a terrible way to die, because the organs shut down within a few days, and death is accelerated by that, plus the sedation and the pain medication that's given.
But you have to have cooperation from everybody involved.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And good in favour of that.
The irony of it is, if you read Ira Byock's book, A Gentle Death, I think it's called, we would agree with it 2,000%,
Yeah.
except we would add a sentence at the
That's-
end that says,
that's true.
somebody who's suffering should be able to get help in dying. That would be our difference.
Yeah, it's
That's it. And it's a shame that we have to not be
I
accepted by hospitals.
write so well and speak so well, and it's sort of like the physician now that's so big on TV and in meetings and so on.
Atul Gawande.
Atul.
Yeah, who wrote
Gawande.
Being Mortal.
You know,
Yeah.
but he won't
won't cross the line.
He won't go to that point of saying,
Right.
yes, assisted dying
Right.
should be permitted.
He's done a great deal in trying to reduce the amount of heroic measures that happens to people at the end of their lives that cause so much suffering.
And he
for them.
presents so beautifully.
Very,
and his
yeah.
language is so good.
Right. No, Being Mortal is a wonderful book. Again, as in Ira Byock's book, you read that and you say, absolutely, yes, you're right. But we would add a sentence at the end, that's all. Yeah, but it's not that way in this country. You know, there's tremendous animosity between what we're trying to do and hospice. That's not true in Oregon, right? Because Oregon hospice was very supportive of, has been very supportive of the
Oh,
law.
yes.
They
Yeah.
were opposed
Still is.
initially, though,
No, they weren't.
weren't they? When,
No.
or did they take a non?
They were neutral, I think.
No, I don't recall them being opposed. Perhaps they were neutral.
But they are
Historically.
definitely
Yeah.
in support now.
Yeah.
Well, the Oregon Medical Association was the first medical association in 1994 to remain neutral in that ballot
Yes.
initiative. But
Yeah.
then in 1997, they did oppose.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it's we have one of our doctors working here to try to get the California Medical Association to just take a neutral stand. You know, not say they're in favor of the change in the law, but it's tough.
Well, the leadership of, say, the CMA, California Medical, takes their orders from the AMA. But I'll tell you, the the San Francisco Medical Society is not opposed.
Oh.
And they came out as either neutral in some of the discussion or even in a positive way.
Have they? Did they make a statement?
Over the years, they have.
Over the state.
Mhm.
Oh, the years. But not the Senate Bill 128.
No, I haven't heard anything about that. But there was a survey not too long ago, and over 50% of physicians who treat AIDS patients in San Francisco and surrounding area are definitely open to providing an assisted death to their patients.
It was really the AIDS epidemic before AZT and all these drugs came that gave a lot of impetus to assisted dying. It was very
Absolutely.
blatant in the AIDS community. If somebody wanted to die, they could get a doctor to give them an injection and that would be it. I don't know if you remember the World Conference in Melbourne in 1996, where this young doctor got up and said, I help AIDS patients all the time, and the first time I went in and the patient was there, but there was a big party going on. There was 30 people in the room.
Right.
And he said, well, could we do this in a private room? He said, no, I want to do it in front of all my friends. So the doctor had no choice but to give him an injection. He died right there. So, yeah.
I've been at several events similar to that.
Yeah.
where-
I want to talk very briefly, because we're running out of time,
Oh,
about dementia. This is the thing that worries most people, it worries most of our members, and it worries me. Not you, because you're way past dementia, but
I'm too old for dementia.
too old for dementia.
Well, and it's not a joke, though. You know,
No.
people in my age group, over 85, over 50%.
That's right, because that's the
end
big
up
risk
with-
factor, is the older you get, the more likely you get to
Absolutely.
lose your marbles. So there's a big article in the Union Tribune today, San Diego paper, about the billions of dollars that dementia now costs, and it's going to double and triple unless they find a cure, which is not happening very quickly. So, but nobody talks about death as a solution to this problem. But it would be my solution without even giving it a thought.
It's certainly, we talk about it.
We
of
talk
course,
about it
at
because
our
we
meetings and
started
stuff.
the Caring Friends program with the objective, and now we do it in Final Exit Network of working with people who want to end their lives with a diagnosis of early dementia. But how do we, what do we do?
The question in most people's minds, and they often call me or write me, they've got early signs of Alzheimer's or dementia, and the question is when? When do I do it? Now? a bit later, a lot later.
Oh, we have that all the
And
time.
then the time rolls on and it's too late.
Right.
Yeah, they miss
They're
their
out of their
window.
minds and so forth.
Right.
Well,
Those with the courage to take their lives at the first signs are few and far between, actually.
As
Yeah.
well they should be, because they have a quality of life. It's,
and that is a
Yeah.
sad thing. And I've been with several who, because they were afraid of losing that window of opportunity
Yes.
to be cognitively able to proceed, they had to prematurely end their lives.
Yeah.
in the Netherlands, I believe that you can sign an advance directive that you want euthanasia if you, whatever, have advanced Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
But it's very rare for a doctor to do it. I
Yeah.
remember seeing at one of the European Right to Die conferences a documentary, I guess, where this man had signed such a directive. And the doctor was coming with a needle, I don't quite understand this now that I remember it, to carry out his wishes, because he was already in an advanced stage. And the man saw this doctor coming and said, "He's going to kill me, he's going to kill me,
Oh,
make him go away."
Yes,
So,
well,
you know, it's not so easy. One doctor here in San Diego advocates that you can fill out an advance directive saying, "Put the food next to me, but don't put it near my mouth," and people can die that way. But I don't know that that's going to happen. And I think we're soon going to have a meeting of directors of memory care units to see how they would handle such a directive.
but part of the side effect of the dementia situation is that it is the leading, let's say, money maker in the industry of caring for elderly people.
Oh gosh.
And there is more construction of new facilities for dementia patients than any other medical
Oh, my
facility.
gosh.
We already have over 5 million American dementia patients in facilities.
But it's all private pay.
Oh, that's just it. And so the profit end of medicine is very much involved in the dementia issue. And to me, that's part of the problem with all of medicine in our country is that profit, it should not be a profit-making industry.
So Derek, if you were king, how would you handle the dementia dilemma?
If I was,
King, you know, whatever, czar, whatever. Right to die, czar.
well, I think I would throw the responsibility onto the people, and as a way as I do now when people talk to me about it, you know, if you want to be sure to die without going into all the years of sickness, then you've got to do it in the very near future, and you've got to do it yourself with the blessing of your family and so forth. And people have got to have the courage and determination to get on with it quite early in the game, which is not easy, no, but not to tackle it early is to fail. And I've seen people. A friend of mine in San Francisco, a French woman who was helped found the French Right to Die organization and worked in Hemlock, and she was married to an American, and she developed Alzheimer's in her 60s, and she said to me, "Will you help me to die at some point?" I said, "Whenever you ask me." And but her dementia moved so fast. Well, the tragic thing was she lost her French. She could no longer speak French, so she couldn't speak to her husband and her medical advisors and all the rest of it. She lost her English.
Yes.
The wrong way around.
I lost my French a long time ago.
No, but I mean, she was a born French-speaking
Yes.
person, and her English, living in San Francisco, just disappeared with her mind, and very difficult to care for her. and she went back to a hospice in France to die. But there again, there was a person philosophically and practically extremely knowledgeable about the right to die movement, meant it, and she left it too long.
Yes, well, and I think the important thing too is to make sure that the diagnosis is confirmed.
That's right.
And we usually recommend that they have at least 2 neurological specialists in dementia cases that have confirmed by their testing that it is definitely an Alzheimer's. And
There's so many kinds of dementia that sometimes
well,
very
yeah,
difficult
there
to.
are many kinds,
Yeah.
but Alzheimer's makes up
Most of it.
over 80 to 90% of all dementia.
There's more Lewy bodies in front of frontal
And-
lobe and all these other things that are quite, the symptoms are quite
Well,
disturbing.
anybody who has experienced a loved one dying with dementia, they, in my opinion, in the cases we've worked with, they are the ones that are most sure that they don't wish
That's right.
to get to that point
That's right.
that they saw their loved one
Right.
reach.
And you carry, in the Ergo store, you carry my, what I call AD for AD, Advanced Directive for Alzheimer's disease, which essentially says if I reach these stages and you check off what's appropriate, which should say either one of these and or all of these, need 24-hour care, whatever, don't recognize my family, then I would like assisted dying. Well, that's very nice to say that. And I would like voluntary euthanasia, I think I put in there. And I would like the people who help me not to be prosecuted, very nice to say that. And that they're doing me a big favor and they're carrying out my wishes, but that's not a legal document. And whether, it would help people who would be prosecuted, like my son, I've told him many times, shoot me if I, a lot of people say that to their kids, which means you go to jail so I can die peacefully. No,
Yeah.
not a good idea. And people have these strange pacts with their loved ones or their friends. You tell me when I have dementia and then you kill me. Well, fine. And then what does the other person do after they've killed the other? I mean, it's just a lot of myths that go around that people are going to deal with this dementia somehow their own way. And
But in expressing their wishes not to have extended living, they should include, and I'm sure you have done this with your writing about it, they should include they do not wish to have extraordinary
Sure.
care.
Well,
They
then you're
don't
advanced
wish
directive.
to have
Yeah,
treatment of their pneumonias.
Right.
They don't wish to be resuscitated. All of this
Right.
should be part
which is
of it.
what a regular advanced
That
directive
you
would
can
be. If you're
put
not
in.
competent, then you don't want any of this stuff to happen to you.
Right.
But then if you also say you want aid in dying, that's another story.
Because we physicians, even though we're not permitted to hasten your dying, we can extend your living that you
Yes.
don't want intolerably.
And indefinitely, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, there are advanced dementia patients on dialysis. It's and this is what Atul Gawande talks about. Not only him, but other people writing in this area talk about not putting a pacemaker into somebody with
Right.
advanced dementia or lots of other conditions that could end their lives peacefully,
Yeah.
and then they're stuck with this pacemaker. No, I mean it's a very
well,
serious problem.
those sort of books and people speaking, or physicians especially speaking about that, does help to educate more and more people.
I have in my advanced directive, you would know more about this than I do, that I don't want any infections treated when I get to the point that I need 24-hour care. I don't know if my care center here would abide by that or
I
not.
see.
Because likely by that time I'd get urinary tract infections, which would be painful, but if given enough comfort care, I'd be okay and I'd die. Maybe, unless I pulled through. But
Well, you need to make sure you have advocates who insist
Yes.
that your wishes are followed.
But that's not so easy either. My kids are, one's this place, one's that place, to stay with me during this whole period, make sure my wishes, who's going to do that?
Yeah.
So,
But Atul Gawande gave the Wreath Lecture out of London about 2 months ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I happened to catch it on BBC World Radio. And the name of the lecture, and these are the most prestigious lectures in Britain, the Wreath Lectures, was assisted suicide.
Ooh.
And during that lecture, he discussed assisted suicide, and I'm quite clear that he said, I'm in favour of controlled assisted suicide.
But that means
I'm in favour of
controlled by
assisted
the
suicide,
physician.
provided it is well controlled, he said.
Well, that's
Yeah.
progress.
Well,
No,
that's
it's-
positive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
And
good.
And a lot of people would say, look at that and say, oh, more bureaucracy? Let me get a copy of Final Exit and figure out how to do this myself. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a
But-
step forward, definitely.
But he was more forward in this than in his book.
I know we're running out of time. One quick question. You still use the word suicide and euthanasia, Derek,
Mhm.
when many of us have talked about aid in dying and more euphemistic words, because you did a survey many years ago showing that once you use suicide and euthanasia, support drops 10% using each term.
Mm.
I find myself very comfortable with aid in dying, and I don't need to use the word suicide, but you feel that this is helpful.
I use all of the phrases appropriately. I don't flog a suicide. I will say assisted suicide, or next time I say assisted dying. But I don't think we can run away from the terms. And in fact, the news media throughout the world, the English-speaking news media, is absolutely locked into the term physician-assisted suicide. And
And
you,
so are the
you never
opponents.
see them say physician-assisted dying.
Yes.
So I try to mollify it and not so as not to be offensive, and to be a good writer by using different terms and phrases, and not to be boring, the same word coming up again. I think that physician-assisted suicide, the word suicide in that 3 letters has become modified by the word physician-assisted. And I think, as it's been going now for 30 odd years, I think most people realize that this is not suicide in the ugly sense of the
Or
word,
the classical,
but this is gentle, necessary, justified suicide,
Rational.
as long as it's prefaced by the words physician-assisted suicide. So I'm not afraid of it. But
Of
I
course,
think you're
we would
right.
talk about assisted suicide without the physician, because we don't necessarily believe
Well,
that the medical means are
both.
necessary.
I use both.
But suicide, just the title, still carries that stigma that most patients who wish to have assistance, most patients don't want to have that stigma attached to their death
Right.
for their loved ones.
Yeah.
And that's
I
the
disagree
problem
with you in most. I think some.
Okay.
You may be right, but my guess would be some patients
Well.
don't want that.
In Oregon, when somebody dies using the Death with Dignity Act, the cause of death on the death certificate is cancer or assisted
Yeah, the
suicide.
main illness.
They don't call
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
Suicide is not in the statute. It says
Right.
specifically this is not suicide.
Yes. Because they wanted that word out.
So what is the cause of death then on the death certificate? Is it
On the
assisted dying?
it's the main disease.
Yeah, the underlying illness.
Yeah, cause of death.
Cancer.
Plus you have the
Yes.
ancillary causes listed. You may have 3 or 4
Oh.
illnesses listed.
Oh, but not assisted dying.
I don't think
Oh,
that.
I don't
Yeah.
think so either, but I don't know. Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been a very interesting discussion. It's
Yeah.
fun. We never get together, the 3 of us, to talk about these things, so it's been very interesting for me.
Appreciate your wonderful way of hosting the talk.
Well, I think we could go on talking for several hours,
I
but
know
we covered a lot of
that.
territory this afternoon with the 3 of us together, and it's